Happy Friday, everybody. This is the Psychedelic States of America Friday News Roundup, powered by Psychedelics Today. Those unfamiliar, my name is Jack Gorsline, founder of Psychedelic States of America, and I independent psychedelic journalist. I'm joined by none other than Psychedelics Today founder Joe Moore today. Joe, how you doing?
Lovely. Excited to be here.
Amazing. Yeah, we got a great show. We're toying around with a couple of really cool segments. We're gonna have a couple of guests. Victor Costanza from Connecticut from Accessible Psychedelic Medicine will be joining us in about 10 minutes to talk a little bit about the latest policy developments in Connecticut and the grassroots community in particular's competing views on what policy reform might look like. And then the back end of the show will be joined by Luke Greer, who is an outspoken advocate for transparency and clarity in the industry at large, formerly of Panacea Plant Sciences, from my understanding, and has some really interesting thoughts on the pretty lengthy delay in announcing the private biopharma partner for the Texas Ibogaine Initiative and why it might be taking so long. Yeah, Joe, anything across the industry that's caught your eye this week that you think we should talk about to start out the show?
We should keep talking about the research. There was a recent conference in New Orleans. I don't know that anybody was on the ground to cover that, but that was a really important psychedelic drug development conference. There was also some attention from RFK given at the Joe Rogan podcast the other day. I tried to get through it. I didn't get too far, but there's definitely some action there. But yeah, we'll just keep filling things in here.
Yeah. For those who might have tuned in on Monday, I touched a little bit when I was hosting solo on RFK Jr.'s comments on Rogan. It, definitely more conservative tone than the administration has led with in the past, and some of their pretty lofty claims to bring psychedelic access to veterans within a year. As I said on Monday, we're going on 9-10 months now, and it does not look like the mechanisms of power in place and the levers aren't really there to be pressed just yet. So we'll definitely see what happens, especially as cannabis rescheduling drags on. As far as a couple of policy updates that I'd love to touch on really quickly, some really interesting action out of Hawaii, which has brought forth a couple of different bills over the last few years. There was definitely some outside money looking to support a number of years ago. I believe New Approach PAC had their fingers in the pot at some point in Hawaii. And they just advanced a task force bill. I've been pretty outspoken in my belief that task force bills don't really do a whole lot of much of anything. But given that progress has stalled in Hawaii for a couple of years, this task force bill seemingly having some serious juice is really exciting. And then another state.
Let's talk about that a bit. Like,
yes.
what does a task force bill do and not do in your experience here, just based on what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really interesting person I'd love to bring on, but has expressed a lot of really colorful thoughts about this in my conversations with him is Greg Ferenstein from the Reason Foundation, who has long pointed out to me in my communications with him that task force bills really serve as recommendations and they can be put together really thoughtfully. I think that the Maryland Psychedelics Task Force report that was released last year is incredibly thoughtful, which is why it's pretty baffling to me that they're just extending the task force rather than going a little bit further and putting some substantive policy reforms in place or at least on the table. But especially when it comes to educating a state legislature about an issue that they've been cold on for a few years running, despite interest from constituents and outside organizations. And they just had the Ram Das Center for Dying retreat down there, annual conference, I believe in Maui, which hosted a who's who of end of life care psychedelic advocates. So there's definitely a strong community. There's definitely constituent support, but the legislature's been cold. So that's where a task force can be a really interesting way to figure out how to reach the state legislature where they're at on the subject. Another great example of a task force doing a lot of good is in Minnesota, where their task force report that they released, I believe last January 2025, actually won an award from a national group that evaluates these kind of things. The thoroughness, the depth of research, the experts they got to put in some testimony in support of it. And now we're seeing Minnesota take a big swing at from my understanding, a more medicalized framework. But there's substantive momentum behind the bill that's been forth this year, albeit with some amendments being called for by local actors in the space.
Right on. Cool. Now what's next here?
Yeah. I know that South Dakota recently advanced. We talked a little bit about this on Monday. I think there was some more action, but South Dakota advanced a trigger bill that particularly is friendly to One Compass Pathways crystal polymorph psilocybin bill. There's also, in my hometown of the greater Richmond area, I guess, Virginia, a mostly conservative county, Chesterfield County, which actually, to contradict my own claim there, did vote they're in majority in favor of Kamala Harris in the 2024 election. But traditionally, having grown up one county over, Chesterfield County skews conservative for sure. Chesterfield County took an extraordinary step, especially at the county level, of establishing an ad hoc plant medicine committee that is going to evaluate the possibility of policy reform, both at the hyperlocal level, but also voicing more support for reform at the state level in the near future. Virginia's taken a big swing at cannabis policy reform this year in particular, and has since flipped the state house and Senate and the governor's mansion with I believe, majority Democrat representation. So it's going to be very interesting to see where psychedelic policy falls into the priorities of new Governor Abigail Spanberger. And Chesterfield County putting down some roots and saying we're taking this seriously is definitely worth noting within the state's political climate. So as a Richmond local, having grown up there, and as somebody who's reported a little bit about what Decrim Nature Virginia has been up to for the last few years, I think it is really cool to see progress being made there. And then at the federal level, there's been some cool stuff happening. But before we get to that, I do want to just highlight a really cool research bill that has since been passed through the Utah House and Senate and is now headed to the governor's desk as of this morning. Utah passed a kind of like a right to try law a few years ago that technically allows doctors to prescribe MDMA and I believe psilocybin with qualifying conditions, but as is tricky when you leave that room open without any protections for medical professionals. To my knowledge, there hasn't been a single patient that's gone through the Utah medical system and been actually legally prescribed, because it poses a direct threat to any doctor that prescribes it to their medical license due to federal oversight. So to see
to be really specific, yes, they can actually lose their right to prescribe their license from the DEA if they are found to be breaking federal law and prescribing things that the DEA doesn't allow them to. So it's not just like their state level licensure, it's also their agreement with the DEA that allows them the right to prescribe.
Yeah, and when that law in particular in Utah made it all the way a few years ago, a lot of people were really excited, and I think it's a clear example of policy awareness and political literacy not really lining up with what people's understanding of a policy framework might be. And again, 3 years on, nobody's been legally prescribed, which is what makes this research bill exciting. Lord knows the Mormons love their loopholes. And so I think there's definitely a strong community in Utah. Salt Lake City has a pretty phenomenal psychedelic conference every year called Psychedelics in the Beehive, which is pretty cool. And, just as a pop culture reference that I am unashamed to know, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives on Hulu features some pretty interesting content surrounding Mormons' use of ketamine-assisted therapy. It's like wine night to some of these Mormon wives, apparently. So I think that keeping an eye on anything that Utah's advancing is really important because of their particular niche within the conservative culture here in the United States.
Right. Absolutely. There's always been a really interesting culture in Utah around this stuff. We've had a lot of students come through our programs from Utah. And famously, Utah played a major role historically in MDMA safety trials, where there was very few communities who used one drug. And they were able to find some communities in Utah who had only used MDMA. Turns out MDMA was not really named in the Bible or the Book of Mormon as a prohibited substance. And so therefore there was some really cool thinking there. that
Gotta love,
helped get some really great data sets.
yeah, as I said, you gotta love those loopholes. Yeah, that I mentioned, and I guess to kind of wrap up as we transition to bringing Victor on, the federal level, there was a really interesting hearing earlier this week in front of the House and Senate Veteran Affairs Committee. Joe, you and I talked, and I've reported on this publicly previously, that the Freedom to Heal Act that was introduced earlier this last year, beginning of December, has since been found through some reporting and some leaked emails from the Senate Veteran Affairs Committee to really not have any legs in Congress, which has left people wondering, where might federal policy reform be headed in Congress in particular, especially after a lot of the hype and the glitz and the glamour surrounding the rollout of the Freedom to Heal Act being filed. Earlier this week, a couple of veterans organizations that you hear from peripherally, but you don't ever necessarily hear, especially in press releases and coverage of going to Congress and speaking out, were involved and voiced support, in particular for the Innovative Centers for Therapy's Excellence bill that I'm again butchering the name, but we've talked extensively about this bill previously. The American Legion was on site and provided some pretty compelling testimony, as well as the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And most notably, it was the involvement of the Wounded Warrior Project, which took some people by surprise last year in joining the new Valor Coalition, which folks might not be familiar with, but is a coalition of veterans organizations looking to radically expand and address, access to innovative therapies to address the veteran suicide crisis in general. So I've rambled long enough, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see what might be working its way through Congress as far as federal psychedelic policy reform in the next few weeks. And again, this hearing seems to be further confirmation of some of the reporting we've discussed, Joe, which is that the Freedom to Heal Act in particular never really had the legs and has left a lot of people wondering what's next. So without further ado, would love to bring in Victor Costanza. Vic, how are you today, sir?
Hey, Jack. Long time no see. How you been?
Good. Really glad to have you. For those who might not be aware, we actually hosted, fall of 2024, right after the election, a really interesting segment with Victor that had a couple of notable technical difficulties about where psychedelic policy in New England might be headed following the 2024 election, in particular, and the loss of Question 4, the psychedelics ballot campaign in Massachusetts. So, Victor, representing Connecticut for accessible psychedelic medicine, tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit about the legislation you guys have gotten filed in the last couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. So, Connecticut for Accessible Psychedelic Medicine, or CAPM, was created in 2024. I started the organization because psilocybin has helped me a lot when it came to dealing with addiction. And I've tried everything to deal with it, like your intensive outpatient programs, your Vivitrol, all these other kind of medical assisted treatments, but nothing seemed to work. So until someone brought up that to try psilocybin, and mind you, I never tried it ever. I never had a psychedelic in my life. And after the first trip, I was like, why aren't we working on this? So after seeing, after having so many treatments fail, I wanted to take the initiative to essentially push legislation here in the state to make sure that, people have access, or at least like feel safe in order to try out these medicines. I was the lead organizer for a while, but I have stepped back. It's the lead organizers now are Sam Evans and Aaron Doolittle. I'm focused on school right now, but I'm still pretty aware with everything that's going on. I'm still part of the board, so I know that I do read everything that's happening in Connecticut. So, but yeah, essentially, we've attempted to try so many kinds of bills. Most notably, we try to push a bill that is inspired by Allison Hoots from New York to essentially create some essentially like an ID program where someone would just have to go to their doctor to do a regular examination and show that they are healthy enough, or at least medically safe enough to try out
Yeah.
psilocybin, they would get the ID and essentially, be able to do any kind of healing journey. Along with that bill, we also put in, legislation to essentially make a psilocybin community-based market, essentially, because here in Connecticut, most notably, our cannabis laws are very corporate-centered. Essentially, we have 4 giant multi-state operators who control the cannabis market, and that's one of the things that we wanted to avoid. Sadly, the Public Health Committee did not take that up. Our Judicial Committee did take up, this is probably the 3rd or 4th time that they try to push like very weak decrim bill, even though with much of our testimonies and advisement that it was not a good bill, but it never passed. So I don't know if you want to bring this up, but Connecticut has made some sort of legislation that's pretty hidden. They didn't tell anyone.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about that. For a little bit of background, folks, in 2021, I believe it was Governor Lamont at the time as well, correct? Signed into law, pilot program bill. I believe it was psilocybin for folks over 21, qualifying conditions. I think it was run through Yale, if I'm not mistaken, Victor. And currently the bill that's been working its way through the legislature, and I believe just passed the House, or I believe it was out of the Public Health Committee in particular, is essentially an expansion of that bill. I think what is notable is that it lowers the age requirement from 21 to 18 and is psilocybin specific from my understanding. But yeah, again, little fanfare surrounding the bill until Marijuana Moment, as they often do, broke the news that it had advanced out of the Connecticut Joint Committee on Public Health. And that's where you come in, Victor. I'm curious to hear your thoughts and in general CAPM's stance on why this bill isn't quite enough. And then we'll talk about what might come next for CAPM in their involvement in this bill, and then we'll wrap it up. So
essentially, this bill is based on a 2021 bill to essentially allow research through Yale. It doesn't specify Yale specifically, but it was supposed to be done through our Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. It was focused primarily on first responders. So right now they have I don't want to say reduced, but like now the qualifications for anyone who wants to do any kind of research, the person has to be of 18 years old, but it is dependent on the medical medical institutions like review board. So essentially, Yale, like Yale's internal review board will decide who will be allowed in this research program. But the other thing is, and this is where I have a little bit of confusion as well, and I don't know if anyone will answer this because we have brought this up before. There has never been an appropriations, there has never been money sent from the state to make this program happen. A state rep about 2 years ago tried to fund it, but it didn't go anywhere. So now that they are extending the language and essentially anticipating the FDA to approve it, which I don't think that's happening anytime soon, just the way that things are going. I'm not sure if this is going to even be funding. It even says some language of if appropriations allow it. So do I think this will go anywhere? I don't know. I don't think so. And we don't even know if these things are even happening, There are some ads, and I've gotten them through Instagram of like try out, not try out, but looking for
clinical
people
trials,
psilocybin. But the thing is, it didn't say anything regarding veterans. It looked pretty general. So it's kind of like we don't know who is actually running this research right now.
Gotcha. Yeah. I know that there's definitely some clinical trials being conducted at Yale. I do think it's really interesting and always worth keeping an eye on if any appropriations are actually scraped together to be put towards funding these things. Again, a lot of rhetorical momentum and a lot of claim support, but as a journalism advisor of mine and mentor of mine once said, nothing really matters until somebody cuts a check.
Right.
There's definitely a lot of symbolism and importance to putting these structures in place and having a program like this, be able to be funded in the future. But again, We're facing a number of crises, both on the mental health front, veteran suicide front. There's a lot of talk. Where is really the action?
Right. And what surprises me is that the co-chair of the Public Health Committee, Dr. Saud Anwar, when we've had private meetings, he told us, and I always remember this. It's like he would rather do electroconvulsive therapy, which I'm like, that's very barbaric. Wow. Yeah. So, but now you're seeing, fast forward, he's saying that, talking about all these benefits, and it's like, dude, we brought this up to you before.
Yeah.
And I really think it's because of, Yale's political leeway, essentially, that they've got to expand this language, right? But to have someone that ignored us for so long to come out of nowhere and say some sort of support of it, it's kind of a slap in the face. So, we're not sure where this is going to go.
Well, we do have to keep it moving, but Victor, always great to see you. I think one last little anecdote about where Connecticut state climate is politically on drug policy is that the Attorney General 2 years ago was the keynote speaker at Smart Approaches to Marijuana's annual conference here in DC. So with a highly corporate dominant medical cannabis market and that kind of allegiance to kind of the neo-prohibitionist movement, it's definitely going to be curious to see where psychedelic policy goes in Connecticut. Victor, thanks again so much, my friend. Always good to see you.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a good one.
Yep.
Thanks, Victor. A couple of comments here. This model comes kind of from the Timothy Leary pilot's license model, where you would get a permit to carry and use. And then Allison Hoots has been championing this quite a bit. I think even some activity around New York State. Allison Hoots is a regular feature at conferences, a psychedelic lawyer, and a friend. So just happy to see that.
Dare I say, one of the most important psychedelic legal minds of our time. And that bill's proliferated in a couple of states. There was a same version of the bill filed in Massachusetts, as well as I think one that might be in the works in Virginia. So worth keeping an eye on.
Worth noting, I think she's also the executive director of the Sacred Plants Alliance. I forgot about that.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. One of the go-to psychedelic church infrastructure organizations out there. So definitely want to keep it moving forward. Lucas, we'll bring Lucas on now. Lucas, how are you, sir? Great to have you.
Doing well. What's up, gentlemen? It's good to see you both.
Yeah, always something. So we'll get to the Texas Ibogaine Initiative and some of Lucas's outspoken thoughts on the delay in the announcement of the pharmaceutical partner of this public-private model. But Lucas, to just get us up to speed on a little bit of your background for those who might not be familiar of your place in the psychedelic ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that before I became interested in the psychedelic space in any business capacity, like a lot of people, I had other personal issues. And I would say that for me, aside from let's say being on the spectrum, ADHD and all those fun things, everybody has those badges. I was hit by a drunk driver in 2021 that made me start looking at alternative medicine and start getting involved in the cannabis industry in a heavy way. Liquid Gold came out of that. And then from there, I had an invention in the cannabis space, which was called a box. I took it off the market, but that's what's on the market now still, that has like the spray packs in the market. That is what connected me with a chief terpene officer, chief science officer of True Terpenes, that then turned into a business. We had a first approved letter from the FDA back in something like 2018 for hemp greens as a food item. And then that was sprayed by mosquito repellent. Long story short, I've been in this space for a long, long time. Panacea Plant Sciences, which birthed out of Zeiss Farms. Panacea Plant Sciences has something like 13 different patents pending, allosteric modulation, things like that, as well as the hemp greens as a food item. And so it's something that I've been heavily involved in, let's say, from the beginning on both a personal and a business aspect. And then it was something that I moved from alternative medicine to legal and went to fight the big pharma and things like that were giving everybody cancers. That was when I helped the opioid abatement settlement and to find people for that. Got involved and kind of saw behind the curtain, if you will, and then started doing my own lobbying and stuff like that in DC, probably in something like 2022 after the PACT Act was passed. and met with people like Jack Bergman way back then, and actually remember sitting in his office. And I didn't pay to get there, like a lot of lobbyists and things like that too. I just used connections to the old head of the HHSS to get me there. And we sat down and I basically told him that, hey, I don't have an ask, but we're going to come to you at a certain point, and things like Ibogaine can be used in replacement of things like methadone and things like that. And we need to have conversations, and we need you on our team. And so that was back in something like 2022, I think, when I was out in DC speaking one of the national psychedelic conferences out there. I've also got an interest on the religious side of things, and part of different memberships of different churches, and have been involved in the organization of those different churches for a long time. And so the spiritual, recreational, and medicinal use of sacraments for me is very important. And then how we get access to those, and the safe access to those is very, very important. I've had lots of friends that have died from unsafe access. And so that's the shortest that I can make my interest in this space. But it's something that I have a very heavy personal interest. I have a heavy business interest. And because of all of those things, I want to take away some of the curtain of things and relieve some of the symptoms that we had from the cannabis rolling out. And see if we can fix things in the psychedelic space. And so I've been putting people on stages and saying, hey, let's talk about these issues. Let's get these things aired out so that they don't become issues 5-10 years down the line, where we have a drug that is approved that nobody insures, for instance. Right.
Yeah. No, yeah. And I so appreciate the perspective. And of course, have followed the work that you and David Hildreth have been doing at Panacea Plant Sciences for a while now. So let's dig into the Texas Ibogaine Research Initiative in particular, and kind of the backstory of how you started paying attention to the regulatory rollout and some of the missing gaps, in your opinion, in terms of announcing the private partner that is supposedly ponying up $50 million to match the $50 million in state funding, right? Give us the 101 on that.
Yeah. So as a business executive and owner, I also have a liquid gold funding company that I've run. I understand equity funding and the mechanisms of it. And so when the conversation started around, oh, hey, there's going to be this grant, we'll call it a grant, quote unquote, for 50 million that you'll match, and that's $100 million investment in a business, as somebody that's involved in the space, that has equity in the space, that has patents that can be applied to that 100 million, was already working with University of Texas Health and things like that in different capacities. It was something that came on my radar as an interest. And then the questions that I was asking when I would start to ask both the bill authors, people that worked in the bill authors offices, as well as the people championing the bill, these questions couldn't be answered. It was kind of like, hey, we'll get to that, but that's not really the concern right now. And so it went from something of, hey, I'm kind of a little bit interested, to, hey, I'm going to start filing, freedom of information request and see if I can just get this information, because this type of thing is being used as the model now around. And if it's going to be used as the model, it's got to make sense. And for me right now, it didn't make business sense. And so without these questions, it wasn't something that I could personally put my stamp of approval on my company and say, hey, let's apply for this. Let's put the effort behind, getting this 50 million and matching it, because I didn't have the answer to these questions. And some of those questions, like the equity stake and things like that, remained unanswered. And how exactly that works, or if it's been done before or hasn't been done before, and the way and the why and the why not, were very important to me. So I started asking lots of people lots of questions. And the long story short is all of the answers are, well, we don't know. We're just pushing things forward. We'll figure that out. And then I still have zero answers in terms of who the actual drug development partner is, aside from the universities. The application deadline between, let's say, the passing of the law to the actual application window that was open, which was only open for something like 30 to 45 days, I think, in like July through August, something like that. And it had to be the university. So it had to be the university that would apply. And then so without the answer to these questions, it was kind of impossible for me to even apply and to partner with even a university, even if we were already partnered with them. And then so how people thought that it was a good idea, how it actually is going to roll out, how those contracts make sense, and then how you could replicate this and keep the benefit only in Texas, but partner with other states. Everything from the beginning didn't make sense to me. But it was, you don't necessarily want to be the squeaky wheel when we are trying to move psychedelic reform, or whatever we want to call it, forward. And then so I tried to do it in a way that doesn't stop things, but also it's like, hey, if we're going to do this in other states, we need to think about these things. And for a business, it doesn't make sense to dilute my equity and to take on this other quote unquote grant when there has been situations like Suboxone that actually was a $61 million NIH grant that never had a diluted equity portion of it. It wasn't like they were saying, hey, for every $5 you make, I want $1 back forever. Right.
Yeah.
That's going to affect cost to the end patient as well, because you have this responsibility and equity that you've already given out.
Of course. Yeah, we're coming up on time here, but this has been incredibly insightful, Lucas. I definitely think it's worth continuing to dive into. I certainly plan to dig into in some future written coverage, who this mysterious private partner might be. I wonder if the currently contracted or, in cahoots, pharmaceutical companies that are working with universities in Texas might be prime candidates, of course. And to your point, as a closing thought on all of this, Joe, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago at a prominent event here at the, here in DC at the U.S. Capitol in the middle of January. I was able to ask Texas Congressman Morgan Luttrell, who notably isn't running for re-election, if he viewed the public-private partnership model that the Texas Ibogaine Initiative has kind of, reinvigorated as the potential standard for fast-tracking psychedelic research, if he viewed that as the way forward at the federal level. And he said point blank, yes. And that was followed by some interesting commentary from Jack Bergman in particular about, I have some moves, some tricks up my sleeve. I'm just not willing to share them just yet. So definitely curious to see what happens as far as contracts at the federal level. There's been definitely rumors of some friendly relationships at the VA with a couple of companies that are vying for some VA funding. So we'll certainly see what happens. Lucas, thanks so much for joining us. Joe, did you have any questions for Lucas before we jump?
No, but I'll throw out some fun commentary. Thank you, Lucas, so much.
Amazing. Thanks, Lucas. All right.
So I have some kind of challenging insights around just how difficult it's going to be to bring Ibogaine across the finish line with FDA, given the cardiac concerns and real risks. So it's going to be very expensive. And on occasion, I wonder if 50 million is enough to incentivize certain companies to come through. And by certain companies, I mean very specific large cap pharma. So something similar to an AbbVie, for instance, or J&J, like what's going to incentivize them to come to the table? I don't know if 50 million is it, but I'm willing to, be entertained and learn more.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens. I think regardless, the research consortium, especially, across a number of states, has the potential to just increase the sheer volume of clinical trial data that we have. But I touched on this on Monday, and you mentioned the conferences in New Orleans. There was a quote circulating on the conference circuit down there, because there were two really great psychedelic conferences in New Orleans last weekend. The director of NIDA actually said drugs that have that pose acute cardiac risks will likely, in her opinion, have a difficult pathway to being approved as medicine by the FDA. It continues to evoke the line of thinking that maybe a rescheduling effort for Ibogaine might be the most viable pathway forward. Rick Perry had notably hinted at something of the sort when he went on Joe Rogan last year with Brian Hubbard. But that's a lot of money too. It is no small feat to take on the DEA. Our friends Catherine Tucker and Shane Pennington can certainly attest. So, Joe, any closing thoughts before we wrap up for the day?
Oh, there's just so much work left to be done, everybody, and we have to stay on top of all of these things. It's important that you all stay educated and that we keep getting educated. So if you have great stories, let us know. Reach out on socials or elsewhere.
Yeah,
and we'd love to hear tips and stories from out there in the field.
Yeah, and I'm definitely curious to see what folks think of the new segmented model. Our hope is to really be able to fast track bringing on some diverse voices and unique perspectives as news develops in real time in the psychedelic industry across any number of disciplines. One closing federal policy thought that I touched on a little bit that I don't want to forget to mention. I noted to Lucas that Congressman Morgan Luttrell of Texas, notably of lone survivor fame, is not running for re-election. We also had a Republican primary in Texas that saw longtime Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw, who was actually the namesake of the Crenshaw Amendment, the first psychedelics related funding bill, in this century, brought forth by him, and actually AOC of all people, was ousted in a pretty remarkable upset victory. So Congress is now losing two very ardent supporters of psychedelic policy reform, both hailing from the GOP, as we face a possible flipping of both the House and the Senate in the midterm elections. Certainly wonder what may come next. We'll be here to fill you in on all the latest as it develops. That's all I've got for today. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week. If you want to get educated, please check out what we've got going on. March 10, we kick off Navigating Psychedelics, Essentials of Psychedelic Integration and Therapies. And it's a bonus deal right now. Bring a friend. They come in for free with you with the full tuition. Got some other events coming up. So please just get on our email list, follow us and Jack on socials, and stay tuned and stay aware. Thanks, everybody.
All right, everybody. Take care.